Hello, and welcome to Prospects for the Circular Economy. This is the fourth session in our two-day event, Can Mining Make the World a Greener Place? Previous sessions have looked at mining, the extraction of minerals and metals from the earth, and the costs and impacts to the environment. We've heard about responsible mining, communities, companies with purpose, the role of governments, and pressure coming from customers and investors. Today, we're talking about the circular economy. We often hear about the circular economy in comparison to the linear economy. And mining is that reference for the linear economy, the take, make, waste economy. Mining is the take. But today we're turning to another part of the economy, to the circular economy, to look at the metals and the materials that we use in our goods and services, and the waste or the disposal and recycling of those wastes. The general accepted definition of circular economy is referred to on three principles: to reduce waste and pollution by design, to keep materials and products in use longer, for example, through recycling, and to support and regenerate natural systems. But let me introduce myself. My name is Stephen Young, and I'm a professor of industrial ecology at the University of Waterloo in Canada. I work in our School of Environment, Enterprise and Development. I teach in areas of sustainability management, and my research is on the ways and means to make use of our natural resources to make them more sustainable. I'm going to begin by introducing the panelists who we will hear after the keynote. So as you can see on the left here, the first panelist is Patrick Schroeder. He's a senior research fellow at Chatham House. Chatham House is a policy think tank in the UK. Patrick works in energy, environment, and resources, and he specializes in the global transition to an inclusive circular economy. Prior to joining Chatham House, he was a research fellow at University of Sussex, where he correlated the idea of circular economy with the United Nations Sustainability Goals. He is the co-editor of a book called The Circular Economy and the Global South, Sustainable Lifestyles and Green Industrial Development, published in 2019. Patrick holds a BA in Chinese from University of Westminster in the UK and a PhD in environmental studies from Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. David Joly is head of sales and marketing insight for Anglo American Platinum. This is a major mining company and the world's largest miner of platinum and platinum group metals, including things like palladium and rhodium and iridium. David has an extensive involvement in sustainability issues and in circular economy in that company. His experience is in the precious metals industry as an analyst, where he's worked on supply and demand and recycling of these metals. He works with end users and producers and recyclers. David was originally trained as a chemist at University of Oxford and University of Nottingham in the UK. Payal Sampat is the mining program director of Earthworks. Earthworks is an NGO with a focus on advocacy and policy. Payal's the mining program director and works on practices and policies with corporations and frontline communities. She is the author of several publications on mining and water and sustainable development and materials economy. She represents Earthworks at the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. She has experience working in a number of NGOs in Washington, DC, in Boston, in Mumbai, and she holds degrees from Tufts University in the USA and St. Xavier's College in India. The keynote speaker today is from University of Michigan in the USA. There he is a professor in the School of Environment and Sustainability and in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. His research focuses on environmental systems, engineering, and industrial ecology. He's a core faculty member of the Center for Sustainable Systems. He teaches in environmental footprinting, input-output analysis, and systems thinking. He was the winner of the Outstanding Achievement Award in Industrial Ecology for a researcher under the age of 36. He is the editor of an important journal for circular economy, Resources, Conservation, and Recycling, and he is the founding chair of the International Conference on Resource Sustainability. He has degrees from Tsinghua University in China and Arizona State in the USA. So I present to you Ming Xu, and he has prepared a video for beginning of today's session.
Hello everyone, welcome to the panel on prospects for the circular economy. My name is Ming Xu. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan. It's a great pleasure for me to be part of this panel and start the panel with a short presentation. In this presentation, I will give you a brief introduction on the circular economy and how it can help to build a sustainable mining. So I want to start with this graph, which shows the global material extraction from 1900 to today, 2015, and a projection, business euro projection till 2050. I want to draw your attention to the areas on the top two areas, minerals and ores. Those are the stuff we got from the mining sector mostly. By 2015, half of the global material extraction are from a mining sector, and if nothing significantly be changed, we in a business euro projection, we will by 2050 almost 2/3 of the material extraction will come from the mining sector. Of course, this will give a lot of pressure to the mining sector to be more sustainable. If we look at the cumulative flow of materials in the whole, in global scale, between 1990 to 2015, this is a graph shows flow of the materials into three big categories: biomass, fossil fuels, and ores and minerals from the mining sector. So for biomass and the fossil fuels, they are like after extraction, they're almost immediately being used and generate emission of waste. But for mineral and ores, most of the extracted materials from the mining sector actually stay in the society for a very long time as stock, like buildings, infrastructure, products. Right? So between 1990 and 2015, about 60% of the minerals and ores extracted are still in the society as stocks. So this gives us an opportunity, looks like give us opportunity for recycling. We don't need to go to the raw materials, and we can just recycle the used material from the stock. Right? So, but recycling is really not enough. So those two figures show the recycling rates of the major materials in the US on the right-hand side and the Europe Union on the left-hand side. In the US, metals is being recycled at around 30%, 35% for a very long time, and probably will never go up too much. On the left-hand side, construction demolition waste in the EU has been recycled pretty good, almost 90%, but other types of materials such as e-waste, which has a lot of metals in there, it's only being recycled for about 41%. So keep in mind that those are in developed countries, and in developing countries we can imagine the recycling rate of those key materials will be much lower. Recycling is not enough. I think there are 4 reasons: limited scrap, technical difficulty, not necessarily more sustainable, and unintended consequences. So first, limited scrap means we can only recycle enough materials from the scrap when infrastructure products becomes reach their end of life. Here it is. This figure shows the global aluminum production from 1900 to 2010. Here, dark area is primary aluminum production. Red areas is recycled material, aluminum. As we can see, only after 1960s, 70s, the secondary aluminum production becomes significant. Many reasons behind that, but one of the reasons is that by before 1960s and the 70s, we didn't have enough scrap from retired infrastructure products. All the infrastructure products, most of them are still in use. We can only start to recycle in a large scale after those products infrastructure reaches end of life and start to retire. So this is aluminum, but a similar situation might happen for other materials. Some probably start to retire. Some infrastructure products are still in use in early stage. So even with enough scrap in stock, the recycling is still difficult because collection from many end-of-life products is very challenging. So think about our production and consumption process. In the production process, we mine materials from mines, and we process them, and we make products and distribute the products to many people, many end users. But the recycling process is a reverse process. That means we have to collect all those materials, end-of-life products from millions, billions of people, households, end users, to come back to the industrial process. And that collection process itself is a big challenge. So just give you a context that on the left-hand side, this is a Morrison copper mine in Arizona in the US, which produced 900 million pounds of copper in 2015. If we want to get the same amount of copper from recycling from end-of-life products, for example, battery electric vehicles, that means we need to get 5 million of end-of-life electric vehicles. So finding those electric vehicles, collecting them, and the logistics involved, it's a big challenge. The second reason why recycling is not enough is technical difficulty. So if you have a more complex product, which means the materials in the products are more mixed, which also means it becomes difficult to separate them. From physics point of view, this means we need additional energy to break the high entropy in the complex products. So this is the evolution of the tools, material products we use, from stones to a simple workbench, and to today's computers and cell phones. So obviously the complexity of those products becomes higher and higher. And as a result, separating those products, taking them apart, recycle, it becomes more difficult. Taking apart recycle materials from furniture obviously is much easier than doing the same for a cell phone. So the third reason why recycling is not enough is that in the recycling process, many processes are actually not very sustainable. So this is a process of recycling end-of-life PV panels. As we can see, a lot of the processes here involves using of chemicals, which could be toxic. And at the same time, a lot of energy needs to be used, and depending on their electricity, how the electricity is produced, there will be additional life cycle emissions in upstream. Another challenge in recycling is that a lot of materials are actually recycled in developing countries. This is an example for plastic waste. In 2000, 17 in G7 countries. As we can see, most of the recycled plastic waste end up in China and other developing countries. And developing countries have different recycling process and policy regulations. Obviously, in recycling in developing countries will have a lot of much more sustainability concerns. So in 2018, what happened was that China imposed an import ban on certain types of solid waste, including plastic waste and some metal waste as well. As a result, we can see first, the recycled materials in the G7 countries becomes less. Second, most of the recycled materials end up in other developed countries, not in China. But in other developed countries, the sustainability concerns in the recycling process are still there. So as a result, in 2018, in developed countries, the recycled material actually becomes more expensive than the virgin material. So this is a price of virgin PET versus recycled PET, which is the red. As we can see, by end of the 2020, recycled materials becomes actually more expensive. And in the US, a lot of material that are recycled actually will end up in landfills instead of being properly treated, because recycling itself becomes more expensive. Recently, China announced all spectrum ban of import solid waste starting in 2021, which will change greatly how the materials are recycled and processed in the developed countries. So the last reason why recycling is not enough is so-called unintended consequences, which is also known as rebound effect or Jevons Paradox, which means if you have a better product, people tend to use it more. As a result, collectively, you actually end up using more energy and resources. Example is more energy efficient appliance. Fridge, for example, say at unit time it saves energy, but because it's so efficient, people tend to use it more. So same thing could happen for recycling here as well. So this is a study shows the rebound effect estimated from the used iPhones sold on eBay. So the idea is that we buy a used phone, we avoid buying a new one. So as a result, we save energy resources from producing that new phone. But in fact, they did a survey shows iPhone 6, different versions of iPhone 6 sold on eBay, and found that a lot of people actually bought the used phone as a spare phone. They still buy new phone at the same time. So this is the way they quantify the rebound effect. As a result, overall there is about 29% of rebound effect, meaning 29% of energy greenhouse gas emissions that could be saved by using a second-hand phone will be avoided because of the people use second-hand phone as a spare phone instead of replacing a new phone. So those are the four reasons that I think recycling is not enough for sustainable mining: limited scrap to recycle, technical difficulties in the recycling process, and also recycling itself is not necessarily more sustainable. Lastly, unintended consequences because of the rebound effect. So what is the solution? So we could think about from a linear economy to a recycling economy, and then to a circular economy. Circular economy, this is topic we're going to discuss in this panel, and many people should familiar with circular economy, but I still want to show this butterfly graph from Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which shows different ways, different strategies in a circular economy. As we can see here, the recycling is only just part of the suite of strategies that a circular economy can bring. So broadly speaking, I think for mining sector, the circular economy, all sorts of circular economy strategies can be categorized into three big groups. First, use less. Just figure out ways to use less material, less products, like sharing economy, product as a service, etc. Second, use longer. Use the product for a longer time, not replacing that with new ones less frequently. Here we have things like extended product lifetime, reuse, etc. Third, use something better, right? To replace non-renewable materials with renewable ones, energy as well. To replace toxic chemicals with environmentally friendly chemicals, for example. With that, I hope I can give you a brief background about circular economy and how it can help for mining, sustainable mining. And I'm sure our other panelists will have much more valuable comments to add. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Ming-Shu. That was a very interesting discussion on why recycling is not enough. And I like the fact that at the end you start to look at circular economy dimensions that are beyond recycling. I'll be curious to see what the panel has to say about this. The attendance list is 256 right now. I'll ask the panelists to turn their cameras on, turn their microphones on if they're going to be speaking. There's David coming in, Ming-Shu in the flesh, Patrick, Pyle. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here today to discuss this topic in the context of mining. I'm going to suggest that we go around the panel, give everybody a chance. I want to remind the audience that there is a Q&A function, and I see questions coming in. We have a technical team in the background here that is answering some of those questions, and we'll be funneling questions to the panel as we proceed over the next half hour, 45 minutes. So going around the table first, I'm going to turn to Patrick to begin and ask you to respond to Ming's provocation. Is recycling enough?
Yes, hello everyone. It's great to see so many participants and such an interest in the topic. Yeah, just to respond to Ming-Shu's presentation and whether recycling is enough or not. No, I fully agree. Recycling is not enough. And as you've seen also from the diagram that was shown, the famous butterfly on the circular economy, it's only one of the so-called loops within the circular economy. Ming-Shu also mentioned already a number of other, what you can call circular economy practices, and these are probably much more important in a way than recycling, including reuse, repair, refurbishment, sharing of devices or products and materials. And what we see is there are increasingly new business models that develop around these new circular economy practices. In a way, it also links to what we also, in our work, we try also to highlight that the circular economy is not only a technical approach, but there's also an important social dimension to it. It's not only about materials, but the way consumers or people, how we, our relationship to products and materials is hugely important. So how we use, how we dispose of the things that we buy, that's a key element, and we need to think a lot more about how we change consumption patterns, how we consume smarter, but very possibly how we consume less. So
do you have, Patrick, do you have an example of a social dimension that comes to mind?
So yes, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about the role of ownership in the circular economy, sharing and sharing models or leasing models of products. So this will require a big shift in what we, how we conceive consumption. Car sharing is one aspect of that. So giving up ownership of vehicles in order to have a more efficient system, in which is crucial for urban mobility. So the focus is on the function of what you could say product service systems. So we do not necessarily need certain items, but we want the function of mobility. Or another item that's often used is washing machines. We don't want washing machines as such. We want, it's not, washing machines are not status symbols either. So we want to have the function of clean clothes, and that can be applied to many other products as well. So that's one. Yeah.
Very good. That's a great example. I'm going to move on to David, please. David, you work for a mining company, so I'm curious to know what your interest and experience is in the circular economy. In particular, you're interested in the world of platinum, and I'm pretty sure we recycle platinum, don't we?
Massively so. So I think the question you asked earlier is recycling enough? And the answer is no, but it's part of the solution. And if you think of that end of where we are, I'll touch on the other end in a moment. But if you think of that end of where we are, platinum is an expensive metal. The rest of the metals we produce are expensive. Rhodium today is $500 million a ton. When you have those sort of prices, you have an economic incentive to recycle. And we see recycling rates well over 90%, quite often over 95%, and quite often higher than that because of that. The technologies existed. I was just reading a book actually about half an hour ago, briefly placed intellectually behind me on my bookcase, from 1982. It doesn't mention recycling, but it does mention refining an awful lot, and it's refining of these feedstocks, which are scrap. So we've been doing it for a long time, I think not for environmental reasons, and those environmental reasons are now more obvious. So, it's very clear that people have been able to design to use minimal amounts of metal, but they need an economic incentive to do that. And that's part of where we are. I think the other thing actually is, and it's a slightly different angle of it that interests me, is the social part to it. And it's not about, I am interested in the use and exactly what Patrick just said, but also the other part of it, if from the donut economy, which I briefly looked up, is, we think there is a requirement for mining to exist as well. So the answer is, how can you do that in a clean way? But that also meets your stakeholders' requirements at that end, and that would be your local communities providing local jobs and doing so cleanly. So it is the idea of the whole thing together. It's not just you can bolt on some recycling and go, now we're a green company or we're a circular economy company. That's part of a solution. But thinking about how can you sell your waste in a different way? For instance, and we have trucks bringing tires to our sites and they go away empty. Can we use those trucks when they're going away empty, put something on them, and you're being more fuel efficient? So it's not just the end product, it's actually that whole life cycle. I'm trying to think about that and trying to think about your environmental impact. That's what I find quite interesting, not just the environmental impact of our products.
You can visualize a fairly integrated model where these are complementary and each has a role.
I agree, exactly. I think the challenge with that, of course, is it's massively complex. Yeah. So you may then still divide it down and say, let's do a bite here and a bite there. But you have to understand that there are more things out there than just that recycling tool to use.
Very good. I'm going to move on to Pyle. You work with an NGO as the mining director, but I know you've looked at recycling, and I'm curious about whether you think the circular economy or recycling can offset some of the mining that David's referring to.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks to the organizers for having me here. Yeah, I think that framing by Professor Xu was really important. I completely agree with the conclusions that our toolbox needs to include not just recycling, but a whole suite of closed loop solutions. And just wanted to sort of, in the interest of a debate, because I think we are all kind of vociferously agreeing with each other here, I think it's worth pointing out that the framing of whether recycling is enough and looking at kind of our business as usual recycling policies is probably insufficient, because currently policies are really tilted, particularly in the US, where a lot of that data was from, tilted towards new extraction and disposal, this linear economy rather than circularity. And really looking at US recycling policies as any kind of model is, almost like looking at US healthcare as a model, which it's not for anyone other than insurance companies. So how can we do better? How can we redefine what recycling is and what that toolbox looks like, and create incentives for circularity? And as you said, I really think we need to be thinking about how we can reap the benefits of minerals and how we can distribute those benefits equitably without incurring the adverse impacts of mining them from the earth or the seabed. How do we find long-term circular solutions that actually offset the need for new extraction and minimize the impacts of materials production? So I think we find ourselves right now in this opportunity moment. We have this opportunity to remake our materials economy in a way and create sort of systemic shifts so that we're redefining not only how we obtain minerals, but how much we are consuming as a society and who has access to those benefits. So if we're not considering how benefits are distributed across society, if we're basically considering recirculation, so that every internal combustion vehicle in California is replaced by an EV without thinking about how we're also bringing those benefits of transit to workers in Bangladesh, we're really not doing our job. So I think of this opportunity moment in three ways. One is we have this chance to reduce the impacts felt by new mining. We have a chance to make this a more equitable and just closed loop economy. And finally, where new extraction is required because we don't have enough of a feedstock, we need to be doing so in a far more responsible way, in meeting a bar that's far higher than currently expected.
All right, that's great. I'm going to come back to some of those points. I want to return to Ming and see if he wants to reply to or emphasize any of the comments that the panelists have already raised.
No, I think, thank you, Steve. Thank you, all the panelists. That was great feedback. Thank you. So I want to just reiterate one thing that I think I missed in my presentation is that recycling is not enough, but I agree with other panelists. Recycling is a critical, important part of the solution. We don't want to just move away from recycling to just focus on other things. Recycling.
And we actually had a comment sort of around that came in from the audience that surely we can make recycling better too, can we?
Yeah, I think so. One thing I think what we can do is just think about the logistics of getting end-of-life products back from consumers and the users back to the industrial process. So that there, I think we have a lot of room to improve from the policy, from regulation point of view.
Okay, good. I'm just going to pick up on that word consumers and customers and the public. And I thought actually I would flip it back to David. You work with a full supply chain in your business, and I'm wondering what customers are saying or looking for when they think about a circular economy or some of these sustainable development issues in relation to something like recycling or reuse?
It's an interesting question. We talk particularly a lot to the automotive sector, but to other sectors as well. And we see a whole range of different views. And I don't think the automotive sector and most of our customers are on a circular economy journey, or they're on a journey, but they don't know that's what it's called. What they are is on is a sustainability journey, and they're aware of that. But sustainability means all sorts of things. So for a lot of Europeans, that's about social aspects at the mine site. For some guys, though, it's about carbon. And I think carbon certainly takes you to a recycling mindset and a minimization of use mindset. But it's not the full picture. And it's very, very interesting seeing different views coming from different places. What it is leading to is more interest in, I think, particularly traceability. Basically saying that you are a responsible corporate citizen, and that's both as an industry and then as an individual body. So, regulation, you mentioned, I think, with Pyle's, representation on IRMA earlier, we look to be registered as a company, to show that we are performing well. But I think recycling becomes more important. And I think not just for ourselves, but showing that this is a sustainable way of behaving. Because in the end, if it isn't, whether that's driven by the end consumer or whether that's driven by the end investor, that drive is coming. We're seeing that commercial incentive. And I think that's hopefully one of the things that is quite different. I think 5 years ago, you could call it greenwashing. I think now the incentives are a bit more real.
Okay, good. I'm going to pick up something that Pyle said about sort of the social side. And I'm thinking that mining is, my question is, where in the world is the circular economy happening, or where should it take place? So if you look at mining, of course, we're quite fixed on location, and we have to go where the ore is and we have to dig the hole there. But in the case of a circular economy, these activities, whether it's the recycling, because you could build a recycling plant in different places, or whether it's activities of recovery or reuse. So I'm wondering what the sort of geopolitics and trade implications of something like recycling is. And I know Patrick has looked at this, for example, in Latin America. Could you pick that up a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, what we're trying to do at Chatham House with our work is to look at, as you say, the international dimension of the circular economy. So there's been a lot of focus on Europe or China, which also has a circular economy law, or what large multinationals are doing. So we're trying to understand a little bit better what's happening in other parts of the world. And we've looked at Latin America. We are now working in Africa with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We also recently started our work on South Asia, and we found out that the discussion is quite vibrant, and there's interest among policymakers, business community, also NGOs, at the UN level, and we see increasingly also policies or action plans that governments are putting in place. Just in Latin America, we have, for example, Chile, Uruguay, and Colombia, who have some kind of national roadmap or strategy. But it's also
that's jobs, that's money, that's benefits to the local economy. Is that what they visualize?
So there's different drivers for this. One of the drivers is to address waste and plastic. That seems to be the entry point for many countries. But it's also the circular economy, for example, in the Chilean context, it's seen as a new model for the economy that could be an alternative to the extractive-led development model. And this has become more relevant now in the COVID context as well, because the global value chains have been disrupted. So governments and looking now at opportunities to generate value at home. So is the circular economy a new potential productive paradigm that can also deliver on some of these the social objectives, employment, but also better distribute the wealth that is being generated through mining, for example, moving also high up the value chain in terms of manufacturing, etc. So that these discussions are connected with the circular economy.
So, Kyle, do you think that there's more jobs in a circular economy, better jobs, different jobs for communities than compared to mining?
As I said earlier, I think this is about durability and longevity, and I think over the long term, there is certainly a significant impact on job creation through a circular economy. And that sort of the jobs in the extractive economy have been shrinking. I mean, that's another reality. And, in terms of sort of the geopolitics of it, the winners and losers aren't necessarily going to be in the same geographies. And we need to acknowledge that in places where there will be job losses felt from mining. Those aren't absolutely, going to be the very same places where we'll see opportunities for recirculation. So what is that just transition going to look like? And how are we going to be, dealing with the sunset industry as we're looking at a sunrise? And I think the way that Anglo-American has been talking about it has been fascinating in terms of thinking of, how a mining company can be a materials stewardship company and look at material service provision. So I think, some of the mining companies that are currently employing hundreds of thousands of people in this sector are also well positioned to answer some of those questions about how to create jobs over the long term for a closed loop materials economy.
Let me pick up that concept and maybe turn it back to David or Ming. But so, oil companies, which are extracting a non-renewable resource, are talking about renewable energy and reconceiving themselves perhaps as energy providers. Is that kind of model, that sort of conception, relevant to a mining company, which is an extractives company, and reconceiving itself as a material company? Is that feasible, or is that too much of a transformation? David or Ming?
Let me give the mining view, and then Ming can disagree with me and correct me, I think, with a bit of realism. So I think one of the things Patrick said was quite interesting earlier, talking about you don't want a washing machine, you want the function of clean clothes. If you're an investor in a mining company, do you actually want people to dig holes? I think what you actually want is to be involved in somehow in the commodity space, and you would like to earn a dividend. If you're working, you don't necessarily want to dig a hole. You'd want to work for a company with a decent job and be paid for it. So there are opportunities to do that. I think, there is a mindset there. The number of meetings I get invited to with circular economy kind of topics is really high. So there's a willingness to change. There's a conceptual desire to do things. What I would say is I think it's a big change, right? The answer is we, as an industry, we're used to going somewhere and dig a hole in the ground and get things out.
Specialists in digging holes.
It's what we think of ourselves as. And if that's what you think of yourself as, that's what you do. And the oil companies have tried that conversion, but I think they're still oil companies at heart. They still have a long way to go. I would say we're still a mining company. I would like to think, I'm playing hopefully a bit of a role, but I'd like to think we're progressing along that route. But I think thinking of ourselves as not a mining company is some way away. But if we start questioning, can we make money by doing these things and doing the right things that are not digging a hole, alongside, is that a more sustainable way, and sustainable in an economic way, not just an environmental way of behaving?
Yeah, yesterday in the business panel, it was this term of transformative change came up, and I think that's what you're referring to, is that really that shift in mindset, that transformation, and whether that's feasible, whether that's possible. Ming, did you want to contribute a little bit here, please?
Yes, I think this is a very is business model change. So as Patrick said, in the manufacturing sector, many companies have shift from a product provider to a service provider. So instead of selling my product to you and go away, I sell a service. and the services provided by the stuff I produced. And that has changed, created a lot of dynamics in the business, at least in the manufacturing sector, which I'm sure Steve, you have much more to say.
Yeah, let me say this. There's actually an example that just came in on the chat to me, raising the concept of, for example, Tesla. Murray Heitzman has indicated, durability of a product can provide a long-term solution instead of focusing on the materials. So something like Tesla is now providing software that upgrades and extends their products. So they're very much enhancing that service as the product matures. Ming?
Right. Let me come back on Tesla later. So as a mining sector, I think that business model shift would be an interesting idea. I'm not sure how feasible that is, but I personally certainly hope that will happen for some mining companies. As of the Tesla example, I think that's an excellent example. Before Tesla, we have a car. The car provides us certain types of functionality, mainly is the mobility. But with Tesla, I think it created additional functionality for consumers, right? So as a consumers, we sit in a Tesla car, we want something else instead of compared to sitting a traditional car, right? So that additional functionality could change a consumer's perspective in terms of the what we want from this product, right? In Tesla car, I don't want to have a new physical car updated very often, right? So I think that's also a very interesting trend in the space.
Yeah, and there was an earlier comment which provides another way of doing that. Sam suggested that, oh no, this is another question. Another individual suggested that there's a right to repair. Cameron suggested that by having the ability to repair your products, and I know there's new regulation in Europe that has just gone through that gives owners the right to repair a product, thus extending the life of those products as well. Patrick Pyle, did you want to add to that? And I'm thinking we've got about 10 minutes left. One of the areas that I think is necessary to discuss is sort of the policy or some of the broader opportunities or drivers or barriers that need to be overcome or thought through in order to achieve or move towards a circular economy. So I know, Patrick, you've spent some time thinking about the policy circumstances internationally. Did you want to contribute there a bit more, please?
Yes. I mean, the right to repair that you just mentioned, I mean, that's a really important policy. And there was quite some pushback from large companies about the right to repair. Obviously, if this is again who has the benefits of the repair sector, really. And I think it's good development that these right to repair regulations open up the space for individual or smaller businesses to do these repairs. I mean, generally in terms of policies, there's a whole set of, there's not one circular economy type of policy that needs to be implemented, but it's a complex combination. So what helps on national level that we've seen are some macro level strategies or roadmaps that governments can plan. And we see this in the European Union with the new Circular Economy Action Plan that was put in place or launched earlier this year. And it's also good to see that now in the pandemic, in the recovery, the European Union is going to pull through with these plans. And within the Circular Economy Action Plan, there's a whole range of different smaller policies. And one of the important ones that is currently open for feedback is the Sustainable Products Initiative. So the consultation period for this is open at the moment, and this will replace the Eco Design Directive next year. And this is key also for trade, because one of the objectives is that only sustainable products should be imported to Europe. So manufacturers and suppliers across the world will need to comply with these new product regulations. These are obviously potentially also barriers for low and middle income countries importing towards Europe. So that's also what we try to highlight, that the international cooperation and support is hugely important to make the circular economy happen across value chains. And we also now see in the EU that there are increasingly international development cooperation programs, targeted support for low and middle income countries on the circular economy. These are also now starting. And this also involves often UN organizations like UNIDO, UNEP, UNDP. Also UNCTAD is looking at circular economy and trade. So this international coordination and cooperation is hugely important, also to ensure, again, that countries are not left behind in this, that the circular economy is not only works for some countries and not for others. This is also important in view of the SDG 2030 agenda, leaving no one behind, etc.
Yeah, no, there's a complex layers and many dimensions to the sorts of policies that are necessary. I have another audience question. It's a bit more technical. Well, it's a business model question. John Thompson has asked, can the panel envisage mining companies leasing the metal that they produce for life? And this could drive conservation and a circular economy. I suppose it doesn't even have to be a mining company. It could be another sort of company. Anybody want to put David?
The answer is certainly in the precious metal space, people already lease metal.
It already happens.
We don't do a lot of it, but people do. And it is interesting. It means typically people have to keep ownership of things, but it's typically in, for example, a chemical plant and things like that. When you think of it as an end of life recycling issue, that's a little bit more challenging because you need to know which country that's going to be in, how can you recover that. But sort of product stewardship rules tie into that actually you see a lot of manufacturers are keener to take their own product back at end of life, if only just for the visual that you don't see it, scrapped by the side of the road. So you do see some of that stuff. I think it's an interesting question, and it goes back to what Ming said. And what are we? If you're in a mining company, are you a mining company or are you something else? The first job is to ask yourself that question: what are we? What could we be? It may be a very long journey to get to do some of these other things. Imagining a business model that would both return the same amount of money and operate differently, but would also not mean that you didn't employ people in the countries you already operate. That's a really challenging circle to square, I think.
Yeah, I suspect also that those sorts of models would work more effectively where there's business to business relationships, perhaps bringing consumers and end of life products into those sorts of arrangements would be more complex.
Yeah, I think where there's residual value, people understand it quite well. So where you see things that are leased already, so if you talk about vehicle sharing, which Patrick touched on earlier, then that becomes much easier. You can have models that might be quite different. It's quite difficult to go to every individual consumer, but actually where there's an economic rationale, people will do that. So the end-of-life vehicles are scrapped well, even where they're individually owned. They get scrapped because
catalytic converters are picked up at the end of life.
The catalytic converter, the glass, the steel, it is scrapped where there's value. Where you're taking something like a mobile phone, where it's much more complex to disassemble, that's where it gets much more difficult. So the design for recycling is part of that as well.
And again, that's one of those principles in the circular economy principles is design. I'm looking at the clock. We've got about 3 minutes left. So I'm going to run from Pyle to Patrick to David and end on Ming. If you could conclude some comments in about 30 seconds, Pyle?
Sure. I think we need to, at this moment in time, as we stand on the brink of what I hope is the age of circularity, no longer the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, but we have an opportunity to remake this moment. We think about not only how are we going to shift those incentives from where it's cheaper to dig holes in the ground, or there's more incentives to dig holes in the ground than to recirculate, but how are we going to front end the removal of some of those barriers to circularity? So for example, we already know that we have, we're on the path to 250 different EV models by 2050 with 15 different battery designs and manufacturers. How are we going to standardize some of those design and take back systems, and really sort of front end some of those larger questions that will trip us up, and we'll find ourselves having the same conversation 15 or 20 years from now.
Very good. Patrick?
Yeah, maybe just to comment briefly on the current situation of COVID and recovery funds and the way now governments spend the funds they have to support business industries and workers, etc. Although we're obviously in a crisis, but it's also an opportunity where we could actually accelerate the transition from linear to circular, especially if governments use the stimulus package in a way that they can leverage additional investments from the private sector into sectors that we see have a particular potential for the circular economy. I think, yeah, that's current opportunity, and it'd be interesting to see whether we make use of it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a tremendous opportunity, but we'll see. David, very briefly, please.
So for me, I think I'd echo what Pyle said, really, actually, which is I think we've gone a long way in the last 10 years, and 5 years, and even 1 year, frankly, in terms of thinking about greenness, sustainability, circular economy. It is changing, and I think you can be optimistic and enthused by the fact that I think there are things happening. Are they going to be enough? I don't know, but there are good things happening. We're headed the right way, in my view.
Thank you. Good to see a mining company agreeing with the Earthworks NGO on that point. And Ming, to conclude.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Quickly, I think we had a lot of good discussion, but I think we also missed some important points in this space.
Couldn't get everything.
Yeah, of course. Particularly, I want people to think more about the equity issue, especially the implications in the developing countries. A lot of things we have talked about are very applicable for developing countries, but for developing countries, there are different situations, and the economy need to develop, and that's something else we need to think about.
Yes, sustainable development and sustainable development goals are a wonderful reference to think about that. Thank you very much to the panelists today for your time and contributions. I want to thank the organizers, the Natural History Museum, and the whole team behind this debate. There's been about 250 participants. Thank you very much for your time. I trust that everybody's taken something from this discussion on the circular economy. And I urge you to join the conference live stream that is in about 30 minutes that closes this event on Can Mining Make the World a Greener Place?